Hello, this is the Association for Project Safety, and we're supporting Cycle to Work Day, the 3rd of August 2023. The Association for Project Safety is here to make sure that everyone living and using our built environment can be healthy and safe. With that in mind, we would like to encourage more people to cycle to work because it's obviously good for your health. But we've got to make sure that cyclists are safe when moving around construction traffic. We're delighted to be joined today by Andy Brooke from CLOCS. Now, CLOCS is a very important group of people. They are there to make construction traffic safer for all other road users, pedestrians included. So, Andy, tell me a little bit about CLOCS and how you started out.
Hi there, Leslie. Yeah, CLOCS is 10 years old this year. We were formed in 2013 following a report commissioned by Transport for London by the Transport Research Laboratory to understand the background and context to what back then was a spate of cycling fatalities related to the construction of the Olympic Park works. So there was an awful lot of construction vehicles put on the road over a short period of time. And unfortunately, there was a spike in cycling fatalities. And that report highlighted a number of issues which led to the formation of CLOCS, Construction Logistics and Cycle Safety, as what was back then, and later became Construction Logistics and Community Safety when it was understood that actually it's about all vulnerable road users and not just cyclists. And the problem was highlighted because construction has an issue with a disproportionate issue of vulnerable road users being killed or seriously injured. HGVs account for about 4 to 5% of traffic, but account for about 20% of cycling fatalities, about 20% of pedestrian fatalities, and about 75% of cycling fatalities. The report highlighted a number of things. There was an inconsistency of standards, so there were standards, but it would change as you went from project to project or area to area. It was very much perceived to be an operator problem. The contractors and clients, not to say they didn't care, but they didn't really have an awareness or understanding of the issue because it was that one step removed. There was a lack of vehicle checking, there was a lack of driver training, and all this culminated in a recommendation for TfL to develop this new initiative, later became CLOCS. One of the biggest issues that we still see today is a lack of awareness. There are now still nearly 4 times as many construction-related fatalities outside the hoardings as are inside, and clients and contractors in particular are simply unaware of that problem. So CLOCS was formed to address all of this, to bring all the stakeholders together, to create that collaborative environment where planning authorities, clients, principal contractors and fleet operators could come together to work on this issue that didn't belong to any one of them, but belonged to them collectively, and they all had a role to play. It was also developed to create a consistent way of working so that operators who went from project to project or contractors who went from client to client could work in a common, consistent way so they could develop best practice, develop good standards without having to reinvent the wheel every time they moved on. And of course, the problem isn't going away with, we're talking about Cycle to Work Day. And of course, there's a huge push on active travel across the whole of the UK. Government and local authorities, everybody's pushing people to get back on bikes, to get on the roads, to walk to work and what have you. That combined with increasing construction traffic is only going to go one way if we're all working together to improve safety standards. So that really is where CLOCS has come from. And as I say, we're 10 years old in 2023, but there's still a lot of work for us to do.
Andy, if you were to say to construction operators and people looking after building sites and projects, what is the one thing that you would like them to do that would make things instantly better? Is there one message that you can give to them?
The one message to everybody working construction would be to develop and maintain a construction logistics plan for every project. We talk about the construction logistics plan, or a CLP, being the golden thread.
Come on, tell me what one of those is.
So it's a construction logistics plan, and it's a plan that is developed initially by the client or developer, usually a planning condition. A local authority or London Borough will ask for a CLP to be produced, and that document outlines how that project is planning on moving materials and goods and people in and out of that project. So it looks at things like routes, it'll look at things like alternative means of transport, so using river or rail. It will look for adoption of best practice standards, so things like CLOCS or FORS or direct vision standard. It will look to start to the outline plan at the start will start to look at vehicle movement. So we'll look at where that project is and where the main roads are. And as then the principal contractor starts to get involved, it becomes what we call a detailed CLP, which is where they start to look at the real mechanics of vehicle movement. So they'll look at the various phases of the project. They'll look at the volumes of materials that need to be moved on and off site. They'll then translate that into the number of vehicle movements, the kind of vehicles need to be used. And they'll start to plan that out so they can see that on day 1, there's going to be 300 vehicle movements, day 2, 350, day 4, 400, and so on. And then they can start to look at the capacity for the road network around there to understand where those pinch points are going to be. It's important that a CLP remains live through the life of the project, and all too often we see them developed because it's a planning condition and sometimes left to gather dust in the corner of an office, which is a real shame, because they are there principally to manage the vehicle movements related to that project. And increasingly, we see projects in quite close proximity, and a CLP over here can work perfectly well, and a CLP over here can work perfectly well, but put the two together because they're sharing the roads, and you've suddenly got a problem. So we also start to really try and push for what we call area-wide or framework CLPs, which is where different contractors and different projects will get together to say, okay, we've got 400 vehicle movements and you've got 400 vehicle movements, and the capacity is only 600. How are we going to do this? Are we going to use holding areas? Going to use consolidation centers? We're going to share operators, so move materials together. So a CLP is that common thread that we look for regulators to make it a planning condition. We look for clients and developers to start that process, and then for a principal contractor to take it, to put meat on the bones, and then to make it live throughout the life of the project. And of course, the fleet operators, we love them to have an involvement in the CLP. We love them to be invited to review it and comment, because they are ultimately the people whose vehicles are the subject of the CLPs. The CLP might say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but of course, it's naive to just assume that that can happen. So it makes good sense to involve fleet operators in those discussions to say, or certainly the significant operators to say, these are our plans, this is what we're going to do. Does it make sense for you? You know, can you do this? And does it create any issues we just haven't thought of? So yes, the one takeaway for everybody is to implement CLPs in whatever capacity you are.
And if you're a cyclist, what do you need to think about when you're considering cycling where there is construction traffic? What do they need to think about?
They need to have an awareness of the size and scale and movement of these vehicles, particularly left-hand turns, where increasingly we see vehicles fitted with all the latest safety equipment, and it really is fantastic. You know, not just the mirrors, but cameras, sensors. We've seen these fantastic new halo lights that sort of shine a light around a vehicle to show you where the exclusion zone is. So increasingly, operators are doing all they can to try and protect cyclists, but we still all too often see cyclists cutting through red lights or going across crossing areas or cutting in front of vehicles. So there has to be that awareness and understanding that these are big, powerful machines that can do a horrific amount of damage if they're not respected and understood. Unfortunately, the construction industry isn't as well connected with cycling groups and community groups as we would possibly like to be. There's a huge appetite from operators to engage with cyclists, to engage the communities, to educate them. And we see contractors and fleet operators doing what we call exchanging places days quite often, and they're fantastic. So it's where they actually take a wagon along to a community area, like a university or outside a shopping centre or something like that, and they park it up and they invite communities and invite cyclists to come and sit in a wagon to see the restricted views, to understand the challenges that driver has in respecting and understanding where those cyclists are. And pretty much without exception, the cyclists who take part in those activities are changed people. They have this brand new understanding and respect for sharing the roads of these vehicles that perhaps they didn't have before. You know, you see these amazing exercises where you sit in a vehicle and you can put a load of cyclists in all the blind spots, and somebody can sit in a vehicle and look and say, there's nobody near me, and they get out of the wagon and turn around and there's 30 cyclists just all in a blind spot. So it's that understanding that, you know, yes, we have safety signage on vehicles, and yes, we have sensors, and you have audible alarms when there's left-hand turns. But if you, as a cyclist, are not playing your role in keeping your eyes open, having an awareness of what's around you, and understanding the challenges those vehicles have in manoeuvring around, then you could be part of the problem.
Thanks very much, Andy. I think the message to take away from that is cyclists should stick to the rules, and people in construction need to be more aware of the the dangers of those blind spots that you talked about around their vehicles. So what we really need to do is keep understanding each other, keep talking a little bit more. And I'm very grateful to you for talking to us today.
Absolutely.
So
thank you very much.
So for Cycle to Work Day, just remember that it's better to be safe on the roads and to avoid accidents rather than having to deal with them afterwards, because bikes and bricks don't mix.